Hi, I'm Poppy Gay, co-founder and co-CEO of accelerateHER, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the next session of the day of accelerateHER Africa. We have a real firecracker of a session for you with two incredible speakers, Andia Chikava and Stacey Brewer, alongside our wonderful moderator, Baratang Mia. For this session today, we'll be focused on investing to drive systemic change. We'll look at where investment into Africa is coming from right now and how are the market dynamics shifting. We'll delve into how African women tech founders can access global markets to hypergrow and benefit. From inclusive fintech to social innovation and clean tech, we'll also look at the types of startups investors are most excited about backing to rebuild and define our new normal. Before we dive in, a quick intro to our moderator and speakers. I'm delighted to firstly introduce our moderator, Baratang Mia. Baratang is a South African-based visionary and award-winning tech social entrepreneur. She is the founder and CEO of Girl Hype Coding Academy for women and girls in underserved communities in South Africa. Together with her team, Baratang's efforts have resulted in a number of scalable global programs that provided consistent impact to youth, educators, and tech startups. Alongside Baratang, we have Andia Chikava. Andia is investment director at the Graça Machel Trust, where she leads the organization's Gender Lens Investing Initiative. She is also the chairperson of New Faces, New Voices Kenya chapter, which, if you don't know, is a women in finance network. Andia was one of the first female fund managers in East Africa and has been instrumental in the setup of 2 fund management companies from scratch in Kenya, where she served in each as managing director. And last but not least, delighted to introduce you all to Stacey Brewer, co-founder and CEO of Spark Schools. Stacey has a Bachelor of Science degree in Human Kinetics, Ergonomics and Organizational Psychology from Rhodes University. She also obtained an MBA in Entrepreneurship from the Gordon Institute of Business Science, and it was here that she channeled her passion for education into her thesis. This research served as the foundation for the establishment of Spark Schools, an innovative educational business model transforming the education sector in South Africa. So I think you'll agree we have a pretty amazing lineup of speakers who are all totally credible for this conversation. And with that, I'll let Baratang take over and lead us into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Poppy. Welcome everybody, and I'm really excited to be facilitating this panel talking about investment and focusing especially on women, which is part of what drives my passion and the women on my panel. So I'm going to start with you, Andia. I've learned that you are very passionate about driving investment to more women entrepreneurs in Africa. So I would like you to share with us what are the barriers women are still facing today, and how do we change the system to undo these barriers?
Thanks, Bar, and I'm really delighted to be here with the accelerateHER team. So we've done extensive research on women entrepreneurs, and we decided to do the initial research ourselves just so that we could be close to the primary data as well as observe those findings as we engage in various programs. And the main key barrier has got to do with access to finance and access to markets for women entrepreneurs. Now, when I say both of those things, if you asked male young entrepreneurs, they would probably say the same things. We also don't have access to finance, and we also don't have access to markets. So the difference that really comes in specifically with women entrepreneurs is really their confidence to raise their hand to access these opportunities actually being tailored for them, because we have demonstrated time and time again that gender neutral banking is not gender inclusive as well. So it really is about incorporating and integrating women, and women tend to prefer to learn a lot more through technical assistance programs. So doing a lot more learning and interaction with them, as well as the access to networks that you need in order to grow your business. So there are more men than women that have access to a successful entrepreneur than women do. The mentors that women have generally in the business is very low. And there's bias, which we haven't really talked about deeply, that comes in the allocation of funding. And it's a function of representation in terms of women's role in leadership.
Wow. Based on the evidence that you've just talked about now, we always also hear an opposite evidence saying that it makes sense to back up women entrepreneurs. Can you tell us more about this, and why should more investors be backing women?
Well, I mean, when we look at women entrepreneurs, we see that as people have taken them for granted. They've seen men with families as more responsible, and they've seen women with families as a risk, despite the fact that several women are actually the sole breadwinners of their families, either widowed or just having what you call a non-existent support. And women have been holding up the economy, and their contribution has been undervalued. We found that when we looked specifically at women entrepreneurs, we saw some very interesting trends. First things is that when you're an entrepreneur, you solve a problem. And we found that at least in the 50% of pool of the women that we're dealing with, aside from having generic products and services, they went further and was solving very specific problems that were affecting the female segment. This is where you find the innovation around sanitary products, around sort of baby food, around skincare, around hair care, all of these very specific niche female problems that women entrepreneurs have taken the time to solve. We also found in those businesses that they tend to hire at least 50% of their staff as women. And you find that if you look at male-owned business, you're lucky if you get 30% of them as women. So if you want to include more women in the workforce, and you want younger women to have more role models, and you want to demonstrate that the story for Africa, which everybody's saying we're a youthful continent, where the average age is 18, what we're saying here is that the road to economic growth is not going to be simply working in corporates, but it's through entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship creates jobs, and will be the one to really integrate women within the workforce.
Thank you, Andia. Stacey, you have had first-hand experience of launching businesses and securing a great deal of investor interest. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Absolutely, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very honored to be part of this panel. So really my journey started at Gibbs, as mentioned by Poppy, where I really was shocked at the state of education in South Africa. I was fortunate enough to go to private schooling when I was young. I went to Rhodes University, even though, I mean, it's a very good university, a state university. I just did not realize the state of the education crisis in South Africa. We currently spend the greatest proportion of our budget and GDP on education, and yet we rank bottom of the world if you look at various competitiveness. What shocked me most, and I mean the most recent stat, is that from the Pearls assessment saying that 78% of our grade 4s in South Africa cannot read for meaning. That's absolutely unacceptable. And so for me, right from the get-go with Spark, my focus on building this business was how do we provide a model that's affordable to the country, that can serve the underserved communities of this country and ensure that they get access to quality education, but at the same time was completely competitive on a global level when it comes to high quality education. And so the way we're able to do it is through our blended learning model, which is really the technology that's been integrated into the learning. And I think because our core focus of Spark was really trying to offer something fundamentally different to the current ecosystem, attracted a lot of attention to and from investors. So initially, we were very fortunate to raise angel investment from angel investors. I didn't understand the term angel investors during my MBA until I got angel investors. And they really are there to support the entrepreneur, not to micromanage, but really provide the space and the opportunity to really take an idea to market and to figure it out. There was a lot of pitching, a lot of no's, but eventually you get a yes. And as soon as you get a yes, then it's a bit of a snowball effect. There's a bit of a FOMO effect where one of our investors would phone one of his friends saying, I'm getting involved, now you need to get involved. And so from there, it really just got going. And so we were able to launch our first school in January 2013. serving 160 kids. And now we have a network of over 12,000 children across all of our schools and employing over 1,000 staff members. And in terms of the investment, it's really just grown from individuals, angels, to funds, mainly international funds, and hopefully over time, some more local South African investors.
Thank you, Stacey. I'm just going to read a little bit of stats, and just as you were speaking, I was thinking about this because I saw it in a venture ban in South Africa. That according to the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, there is an 8% increase in female entrepreneurship, with women leveraging technology to support and scale their businesses around the world. According to the International Finance Corporation, from 2012 to 2017, only 30 million of investment went to female founders in Africa. To put the numbers into context, in 2019 alone, 130 billion of venture capital was invested in entrepreneurs in the US. That means that over a 5-year, female founders in Africa received only 0.02% of what is invested in the US ventures in just a year. So those numbers always trigger me to think, what is it that's different that women like you have done? I know you've just told us our story, but I would love you to tell us. You've talked about how investors loved what you were doing because of your focus on systematic change. Can you tell us more about this? Because I think Andy spoke about what women would go into, solving issues that are impacting women. So what is your experience of working with investors who are not only looking to seek a return on investment, but also to achieve a greater good?
So in terms of the investors that we've got to date, well, pretty much most of them, they are impact investors. They do expect a return, but it's a lot more patient. So instead of a, say, 3 to 5 year horizon, it's a 5 to 7 year horizon in terms of their returns, but they want to make sure that there's actual social good happening. And so right from the beginning, even built in our shareholders agreement, we are not allowed to increase our school fees by a certain percentage, that we will continue to serve the demographic that we aim to serve. Because it's very easy to put up school fees, make great margins, and then it's a whole different ball game. And that was not the focus. So I would say the profile and the risk profile of South African investors versus international investors are very different. And to be honest, if we did not attract the international capital we did, we would have never got off the ground. The South African market is very conservative, takes pretty much minimal risk. A lot of them told us, oh, come back to us once you're making money. Well, that's not the point. Then we don't need you. You need those investors that are willing to take the risk, that are willing to figure out, especially new markets, new technologies, and trying to fundamentally disrupt an industry. You need to take a risk. And so that's why we were so fortunate that we could raise international capital, because just the profile of South Africans are very risk averse. And it would be interesting to see, I mean, if you look at the States, they are willing to take risks. They are willing to back startups, and you do not see that in South Africa. So I think there's a huge amount of companies that just never get off the ground because there is no capital available. And so, I mean, I really hope to see, I mean, we've got a lot of wealthy individuals as well as corporates that should focus a lot more on startups, SMEs, in order to get them off the ground, in order to find these new unicorns of the continent. But across the board, I think working with impact investors has ensured that we're mission aligned. We need to ensure that we continue that going forward, because I think as soon as you do get the wrong investor, and we've had some level of experience with this, that if you're not aligned in terms of what the organization wants to do from a mission, vision, returns, all of that with an investor, it will cause huge problems. And so we constantly reinforce the importance of having investors with us in the long term and are committed for social change, not just in South Africa, but across the continent.
Okay. That's lovely, Stacey. I think you've just answered my question, my next question, which was going to be, how did you go about securing external investment? But I would like to know, what would you tell someone like me who doesn't have the networks that you might have had and who doesn't know what to do, where to start? What would you do differently if you were me?
Great question. I mean, I think more of the focus should be around telling and speaking to as many people as possible, because you don't know who they know and they could introduce you to. So I didn't have the networks right at the beginning. I think doing an MBA absolutely helped to connect to certain individuals, and it brought some level of credibility that I'd done my thesis on it. But I would speak to as many people as possible. Often people will advise you don't share your ideas too much. People are going to steal it. I really do not believe in that. The more you speak to people, the more doors could open. You never know. And I would just encourage just reaching out to everyone and anyone. I mean, there were a lot of no's and a lot of, doors closed, but then at the end of the day, somehow I think it's a lot of luck and the right opportunity approaches and then the doors open. So I would just advise, speak to as many people as possible, get advice, network as much as possible, grab any opportunity to share your idea and thoughts and get feedback from as many people as possible, because you never know what doors might open.
Thank you. That brings me very well to tie it with what India had said in the beginning about the research that they've done. So I would like to know, because 2020 has been a year like no other in recent times. Stacey, as a founder, just before I go to India, how have you adapted and pivoted your business this 2020, this year?
So you're absolutely right. It's been an unbelievable year. I think a great opportunity never wastes a good crisis. We had to completely flip in terms of our learning models. So schools closed down mid-March. They were closed for 2.5 months and then started going back in a phased approach. And there was obviously a lot of fear still around COVID and going back to school, both from a staff perspective as well as our scholars and our families. And so straight away we offered home learning portals. We then went straight into remote learning or virtual learning, so offering free having live lessons and in terms of access for our families, but that was often quite hard because families don't necessarily have the infrastructure at home to support that. And then in fact, our learning models at our school, so our blended learning model, we had to completely change. And where previously we would have scholars rotating, now we have teachers rotating to really limit the movement. And in fact, we actually have a schedule approach. So you only have 50% of the kids back on any one day. So you go back to school every second day. So there was a huge amount of change across our organization, and we had to be very adaptable and move very quickly as regulations also changed. But now, to be honest, now that everyone's in this new routine since July and this new norm, as everyone says, it seems to be a lot more relaxed and people are a lot happier, and both families and staff. And now we've got pretty much 100% of our children back at school, which for us is fantastic. We don't want any time lost in learning.
Yeah, I can relate. I think Girl Hype went through the same thing also. We had to quickly pivot to online and making sure we get exactly what you did. India, what advice do you have for women founders listening today who want to seek investment in today's uncertain times?
I think the way I've looked at the investing community is that there's been this thesis about investing in women is certainly gaining traction. The thesis about also investing in indigenous and local women is also gaining traction. So what I think is that women entrepreneurs need to be more comfortable about being seen and being heard. Usually very comfortable just operating in the background. I know for a fact that most of the businesses were already home-based. So what COVID did was really just put your kids and your husband home with you and sort of create a different environment while you're working. And so there's been lots of competitions that have come out that have been very specific to women entrepreneurs. And we have struggled from a mobilization process to get women to raise their hand. So more women need to hear Stacey's story. More women need to be in the press. And when women are in the press, it's also a challenge to the press to find as many diverse stories across diverse sectors. There is an impression that investors only look at you if you have tech, and more so because of what is happening now with COVID. So what we've been doing is sort of building women's agency and confidence also through networks. Women are part of those networks, and just encouraging financial institutions, whether it's impact investors or banks, to have relationships with women who run networks and use the network as a tool on which they would do deal sourcing. So sometimes deal sourcing is really done by who's the most visible in the media, who's the most visible and eloquent with a pitch. Unfortunately, those are areas that probably women might not necessarily show up very well, but that doesn't mean that their business is weak. And I think I didn't emphasize this earlier. By no means are we insinuating that women businesses have lesser returns or they're less viable. In fact, they're incredibly viable. And just as Stacey has also been able to prove, have got a very strong hand of social issues. We've met people that are making jewelry, but they're sourcing from a community and making sure that the funds are going back to that particular community. We're seeing people that are doing early childhood education and are making sure that there's something very specific there for people with special needs. So it really is something really key when you interact with women entrepreneurs, just to see the big aspect of care. And what I like about COVID is that it's put a spotlight on women leadership, even across the world. And the world is beginning to see the traits of empathy, the traits of sort of looking at facts and data before you move forward. So building a relationship with women entrepreneurs. So I'll say to women, the investors are out there, look for them, raise your hand. Don't be afraid to fail. I always say fail forward and fail up, because each point is learning. And just emphasizing what Stacey said is make sure the investors aligned. They're not doing you a favor. It's a mutual arrangement, a partnership, a synergy that is working collaboratively to basically to fulfill the same aligned objective.
Yeah, thank you. That really touched my heart, because I mean, I think sometimes people misunderstand the concept of women's businesses are also viable. They have this idea that because women tend to go social entrepreneurship, their businesses are not viable business model. And I'm happy you touched on it. But because we have limited time and we have to get back to Poppy to just give us the last word of what she thought of the whole panel and where to from here. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much, Baratang and Stacey and Andia. That was brilliant and insightful and full of good advice as well. And there are lots of universal issues that we hear often, which is the key of access to mentors, to connections who can help you grow your business, and obviously dealing with systemic bias on a daily basis, which is just very backwards. But the key thing is to look forwards. And I think you're right, there are investors out there, so it's key to look for them. There'll be people listening today that can help with your business, and really make sure they are aligned with your business. And I think lastly, the positive thing is despite the madness of this year, 2020 has really shone a great spotlight on the incredible female leaders around the world who have led with, as you said, empathy and looking at facts and data. So let's all, at least take that away as something positive. They've had their moment, and let's make that continue. So thank you guys, and really look forward to the next session.
Thank you.